Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We're delighted to be launching this new series on great plays. I think great plays are very special because in a very short period of time, just a couple of hours, maybe 3 hours, you can get a sense of a sensibility of a different time, different culture, and a different great individual. And compare that to a novel, which might take you a lot longer to go through. So we are able to actually experience a play in a single setting, and we are able to discuss that in a single meetup. So going through a whole range of plays like we're doing right now, and we're going to be doing the second series. Will come up, Phil has a great list of plays, classic plays, and we will go through many of them. But at each point, each set will cover a range of times and range of cultures. So really looking forward to this series. I think the proper place to start is Greece. So I'm glad that we're starting with that. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Phil. Phil.
Thanks, Shrikant. Yes, so we are going to do this first series of seven plays, I believe, right?
Yes, 7 plays.
Right. And like Shrikant said, we're going to try to cover various time periods and various contexts, specifically because we're targeting breadth of coverage and different historical settings and so on. But once we do the first round, we're going to come back and do a series of these rounds. In other words, we're going to go like in concentric circles, kind of like Dante's Inferno, only instead of going down, hopefully we'll be going up. So in today's meetup, we're going to do Antigone, which again is a great beginning, great start. It is such a masterpiece of a play. It earned Sophocles the prize for the best tragedian in that year. As you probably know, every year in Athens, there was a contest for the best play, and Antigone won in that year, not surprisingly. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with the play, so we're not going to go through the detailed description of what's going on. However, I do want to set a brief context for what's going on just by saying that it is connected, obviously, with 2 other plays, Oedipus Rex and 7 Against Thebes, where the plot is set up. And just very, very high level, Oedipus is of the house of Labdacus, I believe. I always forget, Labdacus or Labdacon, is this line of lineage that is cursed because of a set of events that set in motion primarily by Oedipus, and then it keeps on going. So Oedipus obviously fulfills the prophecy about him marrying his own mother, killing his father, and that snowball effect keeps going with his sons, who are set against each other, Polynices and I forget the name, Polynices and his brother are set against each other. Polynices comes from Athens with an army to try to take Thebes. He fails, and his brother kills him, and they both kill each other. And that's the setting for Antigone. Antigone is the sister of the 2 brothers. She is the daughter of Oedipus, and she is the main character of the play. This is the setup. Now, the actual plot and the meaning of the play is much more general, of course, than the actual events, and it has been looked at in the context of state versus individual. It has been looked in the context of authority versus maybe individual protest, even in the context of female versus male, as Antigone is the sole female that stands against the oppression of a stronger or more authoritarian king, Creon. So a lot of themes here. I don't want to necessarily go through a lot of them because I think it'll be interesting to do a discussion on that. However, I do want to set up a couple of interesting relationships that come out in the play. So obviously one of them is Creon versus Antigone. Creon, of course, makes the edict pronouncing that he does not want the offending son of Oedipus, who went against Thebes, to be buried, while the other one is afforded all those rights. That was a huge affront to tradition of burial. Obviously, only the most vicious criminals were not afforded the proper burial and were just left outside to rot and to be eaten by animals. And that was considered to be very impious action, kind of like the ultimate curse, the ultimate reprisal against a person. And so this edict was issued. Antigone cannot abide by it. She thinks that it's immoral and unjust, and so she stands against that. Now, in that, she obviously sets herself up against Creon and against authority. The other interesting relationship that comes out of that is Antigone versus Ismene, her sister. Her sister initially does not go along with her. However, when the stakes are really high and Antigone is about to be arrested and executed, Ismene wants to join her protest, but Antigone doesn't want to have anything to do with her at that point. And it sets up this other interesting relationship about protest versus the rest of society, the rest of maybe the undecided society, let me put it this way, society that it doesn't want to pledge allegiance either way and wants to see what's happening. So it creates this interesting dynamic of people that are or a person who represents the protest and a person who represents kind of the status quo, but is not sure yet where her loyalties lie. And then we have the classical relationship of power versus the prophet, right? And so we have Tiresias, who we know from Oedipus Rex as the prophet who comes a little bit deus ex machina, comes out of nowhere and speaks truth to power, right? And he says, "King, you're wrong. You are you're treading on razor's edge." And this is a really beautiful expression that I really love, that razor edge balance that he talks about. And it is in Greek. It's not just a flowery translation. In Greek, there's a word for razors. Apparently they use them even then. And it literally says you are on this razor's edge. Your fate is balancing on this very precarious fail or do or die type of scenario. And Creon gets so scared that he wants to take back, the steps that he's already taken, but it's too late. And this is the tragedy part of this, that at a certain point, you cannot undo what you've done. And that's what makes this play so striking, right? It's almost like Oedipus, right? You keep going, then that's it. You cannot undo what you've done. You've gone too far. That's what really makes this play so striking, is that even at that point where Creon says, okay, I'm going to try to walk back all of the harsh injunctions that I've made, at that point, he's unable to reel it back in. He's not in control anymore. The fate is in control. And so everything is unraveling. His son dies by committing suicide. Then his wife dies by committing suicide. Of course, Antigone hangs herself, and her dead brother is eaten by animals. And so nothing is right again. Everything is in this chaotic state. The other interesting, beautiful side show or side action is the chorus in all of this. The chorus comes in and represents, again, we had the meeting on Nietzsche and the birth of tragedy just a couple of days ago. And so it's a beautiful thing to watch this in action, how the chorus represents this raw emotion and uncertainty and somewhat vacillating loyalties, right? As the action and the plot progress. So it's very interesting to observe the plot and how they bring up various other instances in Greek mythology where similar things have happened. And they bring up very interesting cases of Niobe and Phineas. And maybe we can go through that a little bit if people are not familiar with them. And then finally, there's a very interesting kind of almost like an interlude, which comes out of nowhere. It's a hymn to Dionysus. It's only 30 or so verses long, but it comes out of nowhere. But it's so interesting that it's part of the play. What is the Dionysian in this play? Is it Creon with his kind of emotional, impulsive ruling, or is it Antigone, who is the Dionysian here, who is the kind of the insurrectionist and the enemy of the state, if you will? So these are some of the interesting, mysterious, beautiful points for me. With that, I will leave it open to Shrikant to see if we can start a discussion here.
Wonderful. So folks, what we are trying to do here is to really commune with literature across time. And we want to do it in a conversational format. So now I invite anybody who has read the play or listened to the play or saw the play on YouTube to comment on the play itself. Let's have a conversation going. What will happen is that as we progress through this series, we're going to have these levels of discussion because you'll be able to compare different characters, different plot lines, different styles, different worldviews. This set, the first set that we are talking about, is very deep in terms of what it says about individual characters, choices people face, how do people handle difficult situation, heroism under pressure, the philosophy of how they think about it. So all these plays have this entire variety of these. So you're welcome to comment on any aspect that you would like. Let's try to keep the comments fairly concise. You can say as much as you want, but keep it concise so we can get as many thoughts on the table as possible. And once we have a bunch of things on the table, we'll go from there. So we're just starting out this series. So we're going to do it in an experimental way. It's going to be conversation based. So Phil has done a fantastic job of putting things on the table, but would love to hear what everybody has to say. So we're going to start with, go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to say something, comment on the play. We're going to start with Evanique, followed by Chris. Evanique.
Yeah, so this is my first experience with Antigone. I had heard of the play, but I just never really checked it out. So thank you for this, Phil and Shrikant. So when I want to start with the opening because I think it's very poignant that the brother that Antigone wanted to bury was an enemy of the city. And so I think in that sense, when I first saw it and she was like, I want to bury my brother. But the credence of the king was that, you can't do that. And then she's like, I'm going to do it anyway. And I thought, wow, she really is a person that stands on principle. But then then I started thinking about it. Like, think of all the other people that were in the enemy army that she really, I feel like she didn't fight for. She was just worried about her brother. So then in a sense, I was like, yeah, but you're going to die for something selfish. And so it wasn't until I actually looked at some commentary afterward that I really got the reason why Antigone wanted to do this, because it has to do with going into the afterworld, going into Hades without being buried. It's really, in that time and in that culture, it was really wrong. I guess they just didn't get a proper rest or something. Kind of like we think of here in America, when something happens, you can't find the body, you can't give it a proper burial. There's like an unrest there. So, um, so I thought, in a sense, yes, she's standing on honor and principle, and I admire that. Um, but I guess it was the second part of the play when she's talking, and she knows there's no hope, right? There's no hope that she's going to make it. Um, she's like, but her body is probably going to be unburied. Her body, she's going to have to go into Hades in this manner because she helped her brother. And so she's asking the gods, begging the gods, I'm trying to do the right thing, and yet I'm going to be the one to suffer. And how many times do we feel like in doing the right thing, part of the hardest part of doing the right thing is that sometimes we may suffer for it. So I thought that was a very good point when she's begging, because I'm like, well, yeah, sometimes you do suffer from doing the right thing. Sometimes it's not the happy ending that you hoped, but it's better. And I thought about that. Um, so I thought that speech in the second half was beautiful. I think too, looking at Crete, the king, and you're right, Phil, it was really tragic because he couldn't see it past himself into the end. But the thing is that, and I noticed in a lot of Greek tragedies, there's this beauty because they're warned several times in several different ways. They're advised by people, don't do this. They're told. Even his own son was like, they're talking about Antigone. They're secretly talking behind your back. They admire this girl. You know, even though like that was his fiance. So again, there was like some personal thing to that. But he's begging his father not to do this, and his father's like, whatever. Um, I think the biggest thing I see is the fact of ego in this, and which is why we don't heed warnings, is why we don't, go with the advice that we know is good or do the thing that we know to do, because our ego gets in the way. And you can see that in the king throughout the play, is that his ego is telling him that in a sense he's above the gods, and he thinks in his head that he is doing the will of the gods because this guy's a traitor. And so um I just thought, like, the more and more he got above himself, the more and more he started thinking of himself as better than everybody else and knowing more than everybody else, which is the most dangerous thing. And now the last part that I thought was really impactful, I'm just going to be concise here. um I think when the prophet comes and she's like, hey, I helped you. I helped you build this. I helped you win those wars. And now you're doing this evil thing. And now I must take it all away from you. You see it throughout all works. You can see it in the Bible. You can see it in different plays where the seer comes. It's like, hey, I gave you all this. I helped you get this. And now you're not even going to listen to me. You're going to turn your back on me. It's like turning your back on God. It's like, okay, then I have to leave you to your fate. And it's not even so much that the gods do anything to create, they just leave him to his own demise. They just let all the consequences that are happening happen. And sometimes that's how, I think it's a beautiful way of showing what human beings do, right? Sometimes people will warn us about certain things and we're like, we're not going to do it. We're going to do our own thing. And then we suffer the consequences. And then we're like, why? Why are we suffering the consequences? And it's not, and sometimes even taking responsibility, it's already too late. It's already in motion. By the time he took responsibility, his son had killed himself. His wife had killed himself. There was no going back. And it's a warning. And I think that's what the play leaves you with. That's what tragedies leave you with. It's a warning. Make make changes before it's too late. So that's what I thought. I
Wonderful.
thought it was great.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Avanique. Next, I'm going to have a comment by Phil, and then we are going to go to Chris, Joe, Allison, and Mike. Phil.
Yeah, just very quickly, Avani, thank you so much for that. Your comments really, totally agree with so much of what you said. And one point that I missed earlier that you pointed out If there's one thread that runs through Oedipus Rex and the Seven Against Thebes and Antigone, it's this idea of hubris, and pride goes before the fall. And we see it beautifully illustrated with even Creon's son telling his father that, you know, Dad, it's, even if you're wise, it's never shameful for anyone to learn new things. And it's such a, you know, a common sense thing, and yet he finds it incredibly hard to do that because he's already committed himself, he's made a public statement, and it's hard for him to walk it back. But hubris is definitely one of the key themes here. The other thing that I really do admire Antigone with you, and one of the things that I wanted to point out is at one point she's described as fierce. And I thought it was pretty funny because, you know, we use that word as a slang today to say this girl is fierce, you know, but she is. And that word that's used there, it's word that has kind of the sense of raw emotion, crudeness, and even savage. Like, she's savage. I mean, she eviscerates Creon when she says, "You think I'm foolish? Maybe the foolishness is in your eyes." And the word for foolishness, in that word that's used there is amoros. We get our word for moron from that. So she kind of calls him a moron in a sense. So she is definitely fierce.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Chris, followed by Joe. Chris.
Hi, everybody. I'll try to keep it short. I actually, I guess, have a very different view from the first two speakers. So I actually saw one of the main themes through Oedipus and Seven Against Thebes in this book is this concept of fate, right? Where, you know, like, so for example, I don't know, like Phil mentioned this. I mean, the reason that brothers kill each other was because their father already cursed them that one day they'll kill each other. Right? So all of these things that happen bad has all either been foretold, cursed, or in some way before it happened, right? Like, you know, the seer, you know, in Seven Against Thebes already saw they're going to be defeated, right? But unfortunately, his wife, you know, like worked against him. So it's that kind of thing. So in a way, you know, translated to our actual lesson learned, I don't really take it as pride and hubris or not able to exercise reason in the right moment, as to say that all of these things are kind of backward looking, like Munder quarterbacking. It's really saying that to learn anything in life, mistakes need to be made first, right? You have to make your fair share of mistakes to actually gain wisdom, which is at the end, that's the core thing, right? Is that although these things are tragic, you know, you at least gain wisdom. You know, it's the price that you pay for the wisdom is by actually making mistakes. So I think that's part of the equivalent of these curses and fates, you know, that are mystical, right? That point out throughout this thing. The second very quick thing is I actually saw both Creon and Antigone are heroes by doing what they believe is right? Antigone is doing what she believes right by upholding the traditional and the custom of the god, where Creon is doing what he believes is right by upholding the social contract, which he believes is most important to uphold a organized society. And what I find disappointing, and this is also very real for humans, that at a certain point we all give in, right? So when the prophet and then turned the course to freaked out on Creon, eventually he freaked out and completely changes his his beliefs and reverse everything he did, right? And trying to undo everything that he was doing. Antigone, I think somebody already talked about this, you know, she did it really at the end. She was not defined, you know, as someone like, say, Joan of Arc, you know, like saying that, you know, God will protect me, you know, like, and you know, I am right. She is actually kind of sorrowful. She's like, you know, she's like, man, this really sucks. I can't believe I take this action. This is going to happen to me. So I think this kind of shows the intersection of the reality and what your beliefs and the limit that it has. And then the very last thing is that I kind of give a picture also of the political dynamic in a what I call a republic / democracy kind of society, right? Where Creon actually wasn't like he had some sort of autocratic power, but he was influenced, by, his core advisors, right? In this case, it's like prophets / the course, right? That they definitely swayed his opinions, where we actually see in modern times that doesn't necessarily happen. So it's interesting that the course was okay to go along, even though they probably doesn't think it's completely correct either. But they were singing the praise of Creon, saying this is all okay, until the prophet scared them penniless, and they're like, oh, this is going to affect us. This is not good. Hey, Creon, did you listen to the prophet? This is going to happen to all of us. So you should change. So I think that's interesting as well to me, in that people do act on their self-interest. And the chorus probably could have changed. They had the responsibility in this as well, but they choose not to until it was made abundantly clear that this is going to be bad for them. So that stuff.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Allison and Mike. Joe.
Yeah, I'm just trying to gather my thoughts and trying to figure out even how we're going to approach this, and even as a series, just trying to think about this at a higher level. I'm thinking about, and I think Phil actually really captured it well when we were talking about it the other night with, Nietzsche. Essentially, the Greeks are dealing with an existential crisis through their plays. And what is your purpose? What are your values? And what are the values being espoused in this play? And I think that that's really what the question is that, and if you think about it, it's this idea of the state, or, is it your family? That is more important. And I think that that's, it's a profound question that you need to ask yourself. Do you follow your own morals, your own moral compass? Or do you obey the law of the city? And I will say this: I agree with Chris to a certain degree, but I get the feeling that Creon does have free will. I think he does have a choice throughout the play, and that he's actually, intent on sticking to his decision. And I kind of understand that perspective. If you think about it, he's running a state. And I think about this even in terms of modern day. If you're in the military, you can't necessarily have everybody doing whatever they want. So this decision to stick by what you believe to be the right thing to do, it's logical. So from that perspective. But I also see Antigone's perspective, obviously, and her willingness to follow her moral compass. And I almost got a feeling, and I couldn't help but think about, even in modern terms, like about the people like Thoreau and civil disobedience. And, what's your criteria in order to not obey the laws of the land? And, for her, it was her belief of, what would happen to her brother if she didn't bury him. I think it's also, it's truly you get the full effect of what it means to be a tragedy, where everybody loses. I think that, you get that feeling in Hamlet, where there's just this absolute carnage and everybody's like kind of dying because of the decisions that have been made. I really felt the same way about this particular play, in the sense that it is heartbreaking to have read, and I just went through, and it just what she was saying, when she would never be married, she would never have children, she would never enjoy certain things in life. That's it's, and then you have Creon at the end as well, who has to watch deal with the loss of his son. So I think from that perspective, it's communicating a message to the Greek people. I mean, what's the decisions? What do you value? And I think from that perspective, it really would make me question my values as to what, do I even have free will? Do I have the ability to make my own decisions, or is my fate determined? And I had another point that was actually kind of important. Whatever.
Can you
I'll
back,
come back
please?
to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next, Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly comment on Joe's remarks. Joe, thank you for bringing us back to the high level for a second. What I find really valuable about going through these plays is not so much the answers, but the kind of questions that they help us formulate. One of the things that I took away from being on jury duty is you hear these lawyers, and what they're trained to do is argue a position and argue an opposite position. Whereas we tend to espouse a position and we stick with it. We're kind of afraid to steelman the other side. And what I find really great about these plays is that they show you, if they're, if the plays are profound and well made, they show you both sides that are convincing. And so, Chris, I really appreciate your comment as well about Creon, that he believes he's doing the right thing. That's what makes it tragic. Everybody always believes they're doing the right thing, but somebody's, wrong to a degree. And seeing those viewpoints, and I agree with Joe's point that when you're running a state, you have to have a certain sort of set of core beliefs, and you have to follow through, and you have certain discipline and so on. But you have this clash, right? You have the clash of the state and its rigid sort of course that it plows through society, and at the same time there's the freedom of the individual, and there's individual freedom of conscience. And of course, Antigone's case is, her defense or her argument is that I cannot not follow my conscience. It's not that she rebels against the king per se. She thinks she can't, he's asking her to do something that is unconscionable. And we see this conflict throughout history and throughout literature. In the Gospels, in the book of Acts, for instance, you have the same kind of question. The disciples say, is it right for us to obey men rather than God, when they're told not to preach, the gospel? It's the same kind of question. Who do you obey? Do you follow the rulers, or do you follow what you believe is right? That's the difficult question. I want to mention too, I think Ernest, you will appreciate this, because I was also born in Soviet Union. So we have all kinds of lores and almost urban legends about these figures in history, like Pavlik Morozov, who betrays his father to follow the communist dogma. And then you have somebody like Taras Bulba, a character from Gogol's work now, that kills his own son because his son betrays the country. And so the loyalty to the country is seen as way above his personal loyalty to his own child. And that, that type of conflict is, you can see different sides being taken here. Antigone is, obviously she's taken the side of her brother, her family, over this loyalty to the state. But then you have other literature in other periods of history where the opposite stance is taken. And that opposite stance is praised versus, allegiance to some sort of personal happiness or personal family loyalty. So that's what makes it so interesting and so contemporary for us, is because it argues these points.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. So I also want to make a general comment of kind of raising it to the high level here of saying, okay, what are we trying to do here? And what's the maximum value we can get from this exercise? I don't think it's proper to make fun of characters. It's, that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is we're trying to first understand the mindset from where all of these people are coming from, because it's actually very different from current times. There is a tendency all of us have to read into them how we would think about it. But actually, when you look at these different times, they think of it in a very different way. And to appreciate that, for example, the form in which they think of it, like these Greeks are thinking of it, is the theme of, are you acting in accordance to the wills of God or will of man? Okay, that's really the form in which Antigone is thinking of it. whatever is proper by the gods, I will do. And I will take whatever risk, whatever the punishment in order to do the right thing. That's how she's thinking about it. And it is, I mean, it's rare, but this is actually a tremendous demonstration of free will here, both on the part of Antigone and part of Creon. You know, they are explicitly saying, you know, this is going to be difficult. She's trying to convince her sister to come along, and she's going to do that. The second thing I want to say is that another way of putting it is that there is the spirit of the depth and spirit of the times. So spirit of the times is whatever it is that is the ruling thing. Spirit of the depths is to kind of look into your conscience and seeing, you know, what's the proper thing to do. And in various times that is interpreted in different ways. So Antigone is very much focused on that, and Creon is not. So there is a difference. He's focused on the spirit of the times. He's focused on saying, I'm the king. He's not, even when warned by prophets whom he knows has the spirit connection to spirit of depths. He's saying, no, this is my thing. Okay, so that's very different kind of motivation than Antigone. It is not just, I feel this way and she feels that way. She has a different base. He has an entirely different base. And the conflict is between that. The thing I like about Greek plays is that everything is very stark. Everything is like these big decisions. Are you going to do this? There are going to be consequences. Are you prepared for that? And so I like the starkness of and the extremity of the entire plot, as well as the crisp clarity and pithiness of people making decisions, making choices. So it is really, I mean, I just love that part. So those were my comments. Now next is going to be Allison, Mike, Maritza, and Evanique. Allison, folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to make comments. Allison.
Excuse me. I first read this in high school, and I remember that I loved Antigone, but it was so long ago, I'd forgotten all about it. And it was very interesting reading again, because I still, felt that same, that, like Phil said, she's a fierce character. And I think she's just wonderful. But at first when I was reading it, I just kept thinking, this is like an 11-car pileup. It's just one tragedy leads to the next, to the next, to the next. But then when I really started thinking about it, listening to our conversation, and what Chris said, where he said that Creon is a hero, I could not disagree more. Because when I read this, what I thought of is wow, nothing's changed. People are killing wives. Nothing's changed. Or, fiancés. And I don't see this as a story that has happened in the past. I see it happening every single day. You look at the news, you hear about it. And also, the whole idea of like the state having laws that, and that are unjust. And so, I mean, it's a great play because it gets you thinking about it. But I can think of many parts of the world, including the United States, where there are laws that are extremely unjust, and that when women are trying to do something for themselves, they literally die for it. I mean, it happens in Texas. It's happening to lots of women are dying right now for dancing. Women, in India are murdered when they leave their husbands. They're burned to death, or their own family kills them. And that's what I think is so tragic about this, is that it is her own uncle. So it's, she's trying to do the right thing for her brother, but it's another family member doing it to her. And it's just, it's ridiculous. And what I feel like with Creon is that it's about his ego and about power, and that, he is now in charge, and he wants to make sure that everybody bends to the will. And I feel like sometimes, when you look at leaders, you can see that there are leaders who are really trying to do the right thing for the people that they are ruling. And then there are leaders who are really all about their own ego. And, he's definitely in that latter camp. So I feel like it's definitely an extremely timely story that's very, very relevant to the era that we're living in today. So, it's a wonderful play.
Thank you, Alison. I completely agree with you on the Creon. Next up is going to be Mike, Maritza, Mike and Maritza. Mike.
Well, I am impressed and puzzled by the difference between how Antigone's civil disobedience differed from Mahatma Gandhi's or MLK's civil disobedience. I also am trying to reason out, without looking up all the detail, the actions of the blind prophet in Oedipus versus the actions of the blind prophet in Antigone. I also wonder the difference between MLK's letter from a Birmingham jail, or as compared to Antigone's suicide, whether she might have been better off to have waited for things to go and maybe made some memorable last words as she was being dispatched by Creon. So I'm left with a lot of more questions than answers, but it does apply to a lot of what goes on today and in recent past, and how we're handling things.
So Mike, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to put that as a question. I'm going to collect questions, kind of large scale questions that I see that are being raised. The question of civil disobedience, whether you should follow unjust law or not. That is something that we will look at. I'm going to give priority to people who have not spoken first. So it's going to be Maritza and Jeannie next.
If I may, how to disobey an unjust law rather than just to disobey an unjust law. I think MLK was more effective.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Jeannie. Maritza.
Hi. Something that strikes me in this play, it's the theme. So, the two very strong characters, Creon and Antigone, they're both prideful and they're both stubborn. And it's, a lot of people have mentioned some of the different aspects there. Now, I get that Creon is supposed to be, the voice of reason. And, he says he thinks, reason is like, he wants to put, what does he say, state of affairs, and he only listens to that. But the interesting thing is that you see throughout the story that it's he is a shining example to what happens when or I guess it shows you how it's not reasonable to never yield to reason. So in that when you become so convinced that your way is the only possible, most correct path towards reason, now you have blinders on. And so you cannot see a different possible potentiality. And I think that that's something that's spotlighted in this play. I see to us a moral entity to not get so stuck. Like the idea of he was even warned, like, he is, and Alison just mentioned, she reminded us all that, this is the uncle. So he is not just king. He is also the uncle to Antigone. So he has a responsibility, a societal responsibility that transcends a legal one from a king perspective. But he denies that connection, or not only denies, almost worse than deny, he fails to account for it. In his mind, it's not important. And I think in so many of the ways in which the dominoes fall for this play, it's shining a spotlight on this idea of you cannot uphold one responsibility at the expense of another. And especially to the point of, you're talking a state-centric versus a community perhaps centric. He's ruling by fear. If you would consider the familial ties, you could now have some type of emotional, and to me, I see here the and maybe it's like very indirect. I don't know, but just as I see it, I see that there's a thread here pointing to the fact that reason is good, but only reason is going to lead you to all kinds of heartache, right? Because it's what we see here. I really like you see the and you can see that how it plays out. Like, he doesn't even realize that he's engaging in hubris until it's far too late for him to pivot. So to me, that's a really sharp, like, look at this, heed this should be a lesson you take away. At least that's how it hit me. I also saw what Chris mentioned, this idea of, there's a lot of is this destiny, or is this maybe it didn't matter what Antigone was going to do. It didn't matter that she was prideful or stubborn, because she is of Oedipus's lineage and she was already doomed. And you see threads of that, but I get the feeling that the writer was not certain, or the writer was not telling me in either direction which I was supposed to get. That the intent was to leave me with the belief as the reader, or maybe watcher as a play. I was to be left with that quandary, the question of, I might have self-determination, but I might not, and it might all be destiny. Like, it wasn't clear which hammer was being, put down. It seemed in the different threads that an argument can be made for either. So that was just like something I saw. It was like, I feel like I can read it and I can make the argument, like, absolutely, for it, our lives are all fate, and you can run away as hard and fast as you can, but you're going to be sucked back into it. But also, if I take a different tone, I can make the argument for self-determination. You walked of your own choice into these horrible situations. You just kept walking into them. So that's that. Those are just a couple things I wanted to bring
Wonderful.
up.
Thank you, Maritza. I'll just say very quickly that the entire thought of the Greek at that time is the fatalism thought. So fatalism, that you're kind of doomed. You have certain fate, is very, very prevalent in Greece at that time. But these particular characters, I see clearly. Just a second, Jeannie. Okay, all right. So I see very clearly in these two characters, free will, which is actually quite unusual for Greek plays at that time. Let's see here. Next up is going to be, firstly, I'm going to give priority to people who have not spoken before, and I'm delighted to see so many people wanting to speak. Okay, so we'll have plenty of time, so we're going to go through everything, but people who have not spoken before will get priority. So it's going to be Jeannie, Connie, and I think Ernest will probably wants to speak. Ernest, if you want to speak, go ahead and type an exclamation mark.
You said Ginny. You just said Ginny. Ginny, I thought you just said Ginny.
Yes, it's going to be Jeannie next. Jeannie, go ahead.
Okay. All right. First of all, I was just so excited when the notice came that you're going to focus on plays, because I'm all about plays too. And Antigone has always been one of my favorite plays. I did the production when I was in college, and I was in the play. I was very excited when you chose this play to be discussed. And going to what Allison said earlier, and how timely this play is in terms of what's happening today. And here we are in 21st century, and things have not changed very much in terms of how a leader of a state can behave. And when I think of Putin's behavior, it's my way or not my, what is the expression? My way or the highway, whatever the expression is. And so, yeah, here we are, 21st century, and we're still suffering the, what do you call it? The behavior of these leaders. So thank you for having a discussion of this.
Let me ask you one question, Ginny. You said this was your favorite play. Can you talk about, can you talk a little bit about why this is your favorite play? What do you like?
Well, of the Greek plays, I guess maybe part of it, the reason is because I did the production, and heroine being a female, Antigone, and strong female character. I don't know. I sort of identified with that, I suppose, to a certain degree, because another one of my favorite character was like St. Joan, for example, and I used her monologue to audition when I was in New York pursuing theater career. So maybe that is one of the reasons. Antigone, girl, female, heroine, and all that.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. And this point that both you and Alison made, I mean, this is the thing about great plays, that though their sensibility is different, the issues are eternal and perennial, and you keep coming back to it in one form or the other. Thank you. Next up is going to be Connie, Ernest, then Evanique, Chris, Joe, and Allison. So next is going to be Connie.
Mine's more of a question, and pretty much from Allison's discussion, and Ginny just touched on it. And my question was, would it make a difference as to how Antigone, it was a woman, had it been a brother and he had done the same thing? Because I did not see it all, in my view, as it being about her being a female. I thought it was just someone that was going against society. So that might be a question that I could just mull over, or you could maybe fill me in on later. Thank you.
Sure. Phil, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question. Initially, it seems that it has nothing to do with her being a female. It's just the kind of the power struggle. But then, as Creon keeps talking, we find out what he's really thinking. And one of the things that he says is, how can I be called a man if a woman gets the upper hand over me? And so it becomes very clear why he is unable to walk it back. If he walks it back, he appears weak. He appears that he is giving in to a woman. And the argument, the other side of it, is Ismene. Ismene, her sister, tells Antigone, we cannot fight with men. Don't fight men, they're stronger than us. So it's this idea, do you accept the current power distribution or do you fight it? And it's pretty obvious that Antigone is on the side of fighting it and not accepting the status quo, whereas Ismene is more of a realist. And she says, look, the way of the world is we're women, we're weaker, we don't have the power. They are men, they're stronger, they do have it. Just be reasonable here. And Antigone says, no way, I'm not going to be reasonable, even if I die. But Creon is very clearly, he feels that pinch of being, he's wounded in his pride. He cannot stand it that a woman of all people is standing up to his authority. And so it's an additional part of this tragic fall that he has. He's unable to bring himself to put himself, lower himself to a woman. And the same thing with his son. He cannot abide that his son, his offspring, is teaching him. He is the big man. He is the father. And now his son is telling him, look, Dad, you cannot always be right. You have to be, anyway, I thought it was pretty good.
No, that was a great answer, Phil. I'll just add one thing. I think the heroism of Antigone is underlined by the fact that in that society, Greek society, the position of women was very low. So what she's doing is truly unusual and truly heroic. So it makes it more heroic because everybody around her doesn't expect her to stand up at all. Maybe her brother might have been able to stand up, that they would have considered as a possibility, but for her to stand up, it is particularly heroic. And that's what makes the play actually much more dramatic. Thank you. Next up is Ernest. Ernest.
Yes, thank you. I understand many people defend the action of Creon, that he is as a general of the state has to defend his city, and the city has suffered a lot because of the aggression. Lots of people got killed, houses get destroyed, the whole infrastructure, everything. But at the same time, even in early antiquity, after the battle, it was, even we didn't have international laws. After the battle, everybody collect their people killed and they get buried. This is even, you don't need any laws. That's state that you cannot transgress. This is universal law, and that's what's the problem with that. After you win, you don't kill prisoners of wars. You don't do that. That's, and so what's the common sense? You give the body of people killed to the family, and their responsibility is to bury the people. That's what happened. And like many people analysis said, after that, it's he started a role of the all this. Because of that, he could not take it back, and it started rolling all these consequent problems that resulted in a terrible state that his son and wife got committed suicide. But that's what you don't do that. That's red lines that he crossed, and that's caused that problem.
Wonderfully put. Thank you. Thank you, Ernest. Great point. Next up is going to be Evanique, Chris, Joe, and Allison. Evanique.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring a couple of different points that I heard. So I feel like both Antigone and Creon are kind of like two sides of the same coin, right? Maritza had mentioned that they're both stubborn, and they're both arrogant. And I can see that in both characters. You know, that's their character flaws. I think of Antigone and you know, she just starts off the play with that I'm going to disobey without even trying to talk to Creon, right? She doesn't make any effort to go to Creon and say, hey, I really want to bury my brother. I really want to try to do this. She's just like, I'm going to do this. And even when her sister tries to talk reason to her, she doesn't want to hear it. She's not even open to it. And, you know, I think I could see like they're both of, it's so funny because both of their character flaws are exactly the same. In that, you know, she's just like, I'm just going to do this. I don't care. And she's like, I'm going to die for it. And I don't care. At first, she tries to get her sister to go along, and then she gets mad at her sister for exercising her own free will and saying, you know what? I don't think I want to die today. You know, so let's not do this. And so she doesn't listen to her. And in a sense, she's almost like Creon in that to her sister, right? To her sister, she's very much like, fine, I will do it myself. And she was like, okay, then I won't speak about it. I won't tell. And she's like, no, go ahead and tell. I want people to know. I want people to know I'm doing this and this is okay. So I see that character flaw in both. And Creon, obviously, that's been talked about, you know, but I just think like Creon not being able to back down. Now I think part of it is I agree with Phil that it is because she's a woman, but I think he would have been like that with any male too. I think it would have been his hubris. You know, if you look at tyrannical leaders, their hubris, it doesn't really matter the sex. They would have found another reason. Oh, this man is of lower character, or you know, if it was a man, it would have just been a different reason. But I think the fate still would have been the same because you disobeyed him. They don't really care that much about sex, the sex of the person. That's just who they are. And I think the tragic part that they both share the same fate is that they both lose their families in a sense. Creon loses the family that he has with his wife and his son committing suicide out of grief. And Antigone loses the potential family she had. She's set to marry the king's son. She is set to have children, and now she's giving all of that up. And I think, since it's right after the war, I think she doesn't take a step back. So I see the tragic characteristics in both. And it shows that even though the person may come off as the hero, and I know we're going to go into the civil disobedience conversation later, so I'll stop at this point, but you see the fatal character flaws in both characters, and it's sad. And even when somebody thinks they're right, like when somebody really feels like they're right, and you can see both of these characters really thought they were right, they really thought they were doing the right thing, they both in a sense ended up with the same fate. They both lost their families. The only thing Creon didn't lose was his life. So those are my just two quick thoughts.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up is going to be Chris, Joe, and Allison. Chris.
Yeah, I think to kind of echo something that Shrikant said before, and I think the agency and free will get mentioned a few times, right, by about like 4 or 5 people. So I think it's important to emphasize that, again, that we don't want to practice, historicism. Is you had to actually view the work through the eyes of the writer, at the time and the audience is designed for. Right? So 3 most important things at the time that's commonly accepted. One is that they don't really have this concept of free will, as Shrikant mentioned, is more as fate, right, and governed by larger forces. Is kind of, you have this predeterminism. And second, they don't even recognize the concepts of sexism, right? They actually thinking that men and women each have their, different roles. So in this specific case, Antigone is acting out in this way will actually not be seen as a virtue, like the way we see it now, but probably seen as a particular negative actions that you could be learned as part of the wisdom to be gained to not act this way. Because by acting this way, this is part of contributing to the tragedy, right? So that just put you into that particular time. And then the third thing, I think there's a lot of what I call backlash against poor Creon. But you really have to think, the philosopher at the time, right, Plato being the most prominent, is really arguing, and he's one of the prominent supporters of the 30 tyrants, right? So if you guys are familiar with that, is that social order is so important, whatever government you have, right? You could have a republic, you could have a oligarchy, and etc. But having someone in charge and maintaining that order and maintaining that social contract is a super important job. Because without it, you will have chaos and massacres and just tremendous social upheaval. And that's ultimately what philosopher says, we don't want that. And what Creon does here, you actually, the reason I say is, he's, like what's called anti-hero, but is heroic in his intent, is that, he is actually the uncle of Antigone, right? He's actually the future father-in-law, right, of Antigone, because his son is betrothed to her. There's tremendous what called familiar and personal feeling you assume toward this person, and he's also the uncle of the of both brothers that's been killed. But the fact is that the one brother brought an entire warring party, right, to the wall of his city and intend to destroy the current party and through upheaval to society. And in his view, he's really upholding the order and laws and protection and everything that's sacred, right, in terms of upholding society and to honor, the party that came to destroy them will be utterly against his belief. So everything he does, ethically from his point of view, he really believes that. Right, and he's willing to sacrifice tremendous consequences to his personal feeling and well-being. So you really have to look at that way in terms of saying, so one, being a tyrant usually you are very what I call self-interest serving, right? You're thinking about what's best for me. So in this case, when I look at it from that point of view, I actually thinking that he's actually making a tremendous sacrifice, in order to preserve social order for his own personal and familiar feelings. And second thing, I think will make him really different from a traditional tyrant. A traditional tyrant, like people like the Assad and the Putin of the Mao Zedong of the world, they never change their mind. And they never change their mind. Okay, they just says this is the way we're gonna go because I'm God. I believe this is the correct thing. If you don't agree with me, I will execute you, and they have, right? And Stalin is forcing this. So, so the fact that Creon actually changed his mind at the end because he's able to be pursued, actually make him very untyrant-like, because that's not what a tyrant does normally. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think the Greeks thought at that time that, that Creon was a hero. I don't think so. But
I call him an anti-hero, but I mean, he's obviously not a hero. But I mean, there's some hero traits.
Got it. Thank you. Next up is going to be, let me see here, Joe, followed by Allison. Joe. Oh, wait a minute. Phil, go
Steve
ahead.
has the next one.
Okay, so it's going to be Phil followed by Steve. Phil.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment very briefly on Chris's points. So I think I would in our interpretation of the text, we have to look at the text because that's what we have. And I would say the way the text is written, it's hard to make out Creon to be a hero. I think everything we learn about him, it becomes clear that he's acting knowing that he's not doing the right thing for the state. That's kind of the premise, right? Because if it's not the case, then obviously everything is turned on its head, and Antigone becomes the anti-hero and he becomes the hero, right? But I think the premise is that he knows that he's doing something that actually is threatening the fabric of society, because he's overturning traditions that are so deeply ingrained in everybody's understanding that it is actually threatening, not just to the people involved, but to society at large. Why do we have basis for this? Well, one of the things that we learn is that when Antigone makes her stand, she's actually supported by the people. And Creon, when he hears about this, he says, well, I'm not going to let that deter me, because who are they? I'm the one, there's one man basically to rule the state, and that's me. So no democracy here. But we do learn that that's actually the case. And why do people support Antigone? Probably not because of some personal relationship, but because they understand that to go against that would be incurring God's wrath. And they've already experienced that with Oedipus. I mean, they know that to violate these deeply held traditions, which are kind of essential to civilization, right? They are beyond the state, right? The state, when the state overreaches and tries to overturn things that are so deep and deeply ingrained in human psyche or in civilization, it's going to backfire. And that's why it's Tiresias as a prophet, his role is to remind. His role is not to inform. This is not new information. It's to remind him that, look, you've gone beyond your mandate here. And I want to read just a few lines, because I think it's so beautiful the way he puts it. He says, you've confused, this is Tiresias speaking to Creon. This is verses 1065 and below. You've confused the upper and lower worlds. You settle the living person without honor in a tomb. You keep up here that which belongs below, a corpse unburied and holy. So he has done this reversal, and Greeks are very good at pointing out these reversals, the peripeteia, right? You have the corpse is up here, not buried, but the living person, Antigone, you have put her in a living tomb. So what are you doing? You've completely overturned everything. What do you think the next thing is going to happen? And we can kind of sense it. The gods are just going to go berserk, and that's what happens, right? It's set up so clearly. So I don't agree with Chris in terms of painting him as a hero. I think he is painted as a villain. Now, whether or not you agree with the general premise that state has certain requires certain allegiance and loyalty, that's a separate point, because there are better rulers than Creon to argue for that. Creon is not your best case. Maybe Julius Caesar, maybe somebody else, or like from, but not necessarily Creon. So that's all.
Excellent point, Phil. Completely agree. And I think whenever we are looking at these things, we have to look at that time and how people there would have looked at these characters, and not read into our own ideas of what is the place of state in society, as opposed to what Greeks would think. The beautiful thing here is that none of them are actually objecting to the fact that this brother who attacked the city was killed. They have no qualms about it. They think that was the right thing to do. The only issue is that he's not being treated as he should be treated after death. It is not according to traditions, according to God, according to family. It's all, and that is all because of this personal vendetta or personal kind of power play by this person acting in opposition to the will of God. That's the only issue that is being fought on. Next up is going to be Steve, followed by Joe. Steve.
Hello, everyone. Few points to make. I think we have to remember these are Oedipus's incestuous children that we're talking about. So we know nothing good is going to come, for them. First point. In the prologue, it states that Eteocles and Polynices agreed to share the throne. And that's why Polynices, when he went to take over power, Creon sided with Eteocles and said, no, you cannot have power. So Creon, in fact, started the whole ball rolling as far as all these people being unburied. So that was one point. So he did actually play favorites with the family. He chose Eteocles over Polynices, but his argument to Haman is, I can't free Antigone. They'll say I'm playing family manners, that I'm letting her go because she's family, and I can't do that. So it shows Creon to, be a hypocrite there. Another point is when Tiresias tells Creon, you have to free Antigone and bury Polynices, he does just the opposite. Even when he's given a final chance to get out of this predicament, he still does what he wants, probably from his fear of the gods. He goes and buries Polynices first, and then when they get to the cave, Antigone is dead there. So, it's very interesting. It's kind of like Pharaoh. All these plagues have come to Pharaoh. All of the Egyptian gods have been defeated through all these plagues by a monotheistic God. Their firstborn is finally slaughtered. And then what does he do? He sends his army after the Jews. I mean, how much punishment do you want to take? So thank you for letting me share.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. Great observations. Folks, this is just amazing discussion on this play. I just love this. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Allison. Joe.
Yeah, I'm just actually, Phil actually just made most of the points that I was actually going to make.
Sorry about that.
As far as, no, I mean, I'm actually happy that you did. The one thing I'll just say is that I do think, and Jenny hit it on a little bit earlier, that this is saying something about authoritarianism, particularly at that time. And so that question is being raised. But I also think about it from the perspective of Socrates, and that nobody does harm intentionally. And so if you really think about it from that perspective, I mean, Creon his decisions lead to his own demise. I mean, so this idea that he's acting, you know, in you know, he in some way that is based on just his just on his desires, I think is you know, is kind of not the case. I think he's doing what he actually thinks to be the right thing to do. I just think he's ignorant to what is the right thing to do. Also, I think it's pretty interesting as well with Socrates that if you consider the three things that he was convicted for, the three things that were corrupting the youth. The second thing was worshiping false gods. And the third thing was not worshiping the state religion. So if you think about it from that, that's an interesting perspective, because essentially that's what Antigone's doing. So the bottom line is that I think what we have to keep coming back to is that the play's intention is to raise questions, and it does that in a very effective way. And I think that I think Phil had actually brought up the idea how rhetoric is used as well. And I think that that's a very important thing to consider is, you know, how the rhetoric is used on both sides, both with Creon and Antigone. And I had something to say about her interaction with her sister, something that Ebony mentioned that had come to mind, but I forget anyway. Or it's so that.
Thank you, Joe. So one of the questions I'm going to pose for everybody is, how did Greeks see this play? Okay, because that's very important. This was a very popular play, and plays for Greeks were not entertainment. They were core part of their culture, of how they grappled with deep philosophical problems. That's what this play is about to them. So let's raise that as an issue, as a question. You know, once we're done with comments, please go on with comments. Next up is going to be Allison, followed by Steve. Allison.
I think one thing to remember about Greece is that they have Athens is not called Athens in Greece. It's Athena. It's named after their Greek goddess. And the Parthenon is a temple to that goddess. So I think there's always been like a strong, an element of strong women in Greek culture. I mean, you've got Antigone, you've got Clytemnestra, Athena. So that's always been a part of their culture, much more than here. But the other thing that I really see in this is also the issue of like a generation gap in a sense. And, it's funny kind of reading it. I just keep thinking of like the hearings this week, Congress about, TikTok. And so, but you have this generation gap between the boomers and Gen Z, and the Gen Z are saying, we want freedom of speech. And then it's so ironic that the boomers were like, no, but they were the very people who were famous for all of their anti-war protests in the 60s. So they get older and they're like, oh, no, now we want, But I think that frequently there is a point at which older generations, it's like they're passing the baton onto the next generation and they're fighting it. And I think it's always sort of been that way, that, you want lots of change when you're younger, and you get older and you're kind of like, I don't really want so much change. And then here comes this younger generation spouting off their beliefs, and they're like, no. And what's so ironic about this is that when you look at this, you've got murder, you've got incest, more murder, more murder, more murder. And then Antigone does the least offensive violation of law in the entire thing. All she wants to do is bury her brother. That's it. But compared to all the like incest and murder, it's nothing. But yet it becomes this major thing. So it's I think this hanging on, the older generation fighting the younger generation is not so much about whatever the ideal is at the moment. It's about power, and it's about their jealousy of the youth. because they know that they don't have that much longer. So they're jealous of the youth and all the many years ahead for a younger generation. And there's always this conflict. And you see it, 3,000 years ago, and you see it today. But it's always kind of this conflict where they sort of admire them, but it's like they're jealous of the youth, I don't know. That's something I see in it.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Next up is Steve. Steve.
Yeah. The sharing of power is an interesting point. I see Chris mentioned something in his note there in the chat. But I think it's very germane when we look at the vaccination issue that we've had the last few years. It seems to be the same arguments that the state says everyone must be vaccinated. This is our power. We want to keep order. We want to keep everyone healthy and safe. And then we have the counter argument where people are saying, well, I believe in a higher power, and I feel that God wants me not to be vaccinated, and I'll be just fine. So I think we still have that same kind of argument even today in our society, as who is the higher authority, who gets to choose how we live our lives on earth.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. We'll go to Jenny, and then folks, again, Phil, if you want to put some topics on the table, you're welcome to do that. But first, comment from Phil and then to Jenny. Phil.
Yeah, I just want to mention that perhaps a better framing of what Steve mentioned would be some of the contemporary issues that touch specifically on issues that are considered to be ethical, right? So for instance, abortion is one such issue. Whichever camp you go to, they consider it to be an ethical issue, a moral issue. And that raises the question, whatever laws are instigated, people object to those laws primarily on moral or ethical grounds. One of the paradigms that I was thinking along those lines is the work by Hobbes, Leviathan. Leviathan, of course, is this monster that arises from us giving our consent to this body, right? That is not any of us individually, but a group of us that has this delegate power. And that power is awesome in an old sense of the word, meaning it's terrible, it's terrifying, right? It's terrifying in its scope. And Creon wields this power in this play. He can decide people's fates, whether they live or they die. And modern tyrants and rulers have that same power. Modern state has that same power. It has the power of life or death. And the issue here is there ever, I mean, I guess the issue that's raised is it ever worth it for an individual to stand up to this power, assuming that you're going to get what's coming to you, meaning death? And what are the reasons that would make you do this? Now, Creon actually says, no, it's not worth it. It's foolish. And he says, no, even the most foolish person will recognize at the point of the sword that what he's doing is foolish. But Antigone challenges that, and she says, no, there are some things that are actually worth dying for, apparently. Now, again, this is not, I'm not saying I agree with her or I agree with him. I'm just saying these are the types of questions that are raised here. Is it ever worth it to put your life on the line, knowing that you could get that? And I would agree, it's not a clear-cut answer at all. One complication here, or maybe one other reference that I want to mention, is Ecclesiastes, where it makes a statement that a living dog is better than a dead lion. And you kind of have to, put that into context. It was probably written around the same time as Antigone. And it gives you a completely different answer to this question of protesting and all the rest of it. So just wanted to frame it in that sense.
Wonderful. Thank you. So now we'll go to Ginny. Ginny next. Ginny, go ahead.
I think I'm kind of relating to what question you asked earlier, Shrikant. I mean, I was thinking about the Greek audience. It is my understanding from taking courses in college that Greek audience knew the basic storyline of whether it be Antigone, Oedipus Rex, blah, blah, blah. And the Greek audience came to see what Sophocles did with Antigone's storyline. How did he render this story? And so when I think about that, it's just amazing how Greek people during that time, thousands of years ago, were so attuned to, interested in moral questions and all that. I don't think even people today, audience today, are that in tune and in questions that kind of questions even today. So I think Greeks were pretty amazing, thousands of years ago. That's my little 2 cents.
Great point. So what I want to do next is I want to raise a couple of points. I want to look at it as a whole. The one, I want to follow up on what Jeannie talked about. How did Greeks view this? How did Greeks view this play? Because that's crucial to understanding the nature of the play, because the play is always written at a particular time for a particular audience. And if you try to put yourself in there and not understand the kind of idiosyncrasies and differences between the way they look at things and the way we look at things. So for example, in this case, the issue of gods, that, there are proper things to do based on gods that they had. And that was almost universal. So Socrates was not in the mainstream of that. They did not think of it as a generational thing. Everybody would agree that this is not a generational thing. This is not about, Creon thinking this. They would say, oh, he's acting against the gods, even when he's been warned by multiple people. So you can make mistakes, but he kept on doing that. So that's not good. He's acting immorally, is what many of the Greeks would say. And that's the reaction that they would have to the play, that Antigone, in spite of all of this, is doing the right thing versus Creon is not, something like that. So one question is that of, how Greeks would view it. Secondly, I also want to know, what was your reaction to the play as a whole? What did you like about it? What experience was it as compared to other things? What did you like about it or dislike about it, if you want? So your entire kind of thing. So those two, you can talk about both of them, one of them, anything that you want. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to share. Because you see, what we're trying to do is that we're trying to see these other cultures and see what is it. I think slowly the pattern would emerge over time of what is constant and what is variable. There are some things that are constant and some things that are variable. And that keeps changing, that will happen. We'll see many, many, many such plays, and it's going to be an opportunity. But I think it requires willingness to kind of temporarily suspend our way of looking at things and try to put yourself in the shoe of the other culture. Next up is going to be Joe.
So what did Greeks think about the play was the first question. My guess is that they would actually have been walking away kind of questioning their role in the world, and actually questioning the role of their leadership. What is a just law? And I think that that's what would come up for me if I were sitting in the audience. What would be the right thing to do if I truly believed, if I identified with Antigone? Would I be inspired enough to follow in her footsteps, so to speak? So I think people would have walked away questioning, how much control do they even have over their own lives? and over their own decisions, which, you know, it makes sense because it's fate and free will that we're kind of talking about in a way. So I think it would have raised a lot of different questions. What's the best form of government, maybe to a certain extent as well. When you should yield your position, you know, I think as well, when you should revisit what you're thinking, is something I would have thought about. And I'm just saying the Greeks, but I would have these same questions. As far as what did I think of the play? I think that it actually creates a certain level of emotion. I mean, you really, really feel when Antigone is, and I mentioned this already, when she's dying, what she's going through, what's going through her mind, you know, that you feel actually really sad. I mean, and you kind of and you can identify with her sister as well. You know, her sister's initial reaction is to say that, you know, or actually Antigone's reaction to her sister, you know, basically follow your own conscience, it's fine, but I'm going to follow mine. And I think that for me, that was particularly powerful. It was she wasn't necessarily condemning her sister for not doing the same thing that she was doing. And I think that that's a very, that's, you know, that I think that that's very important, that you follow your conscience, and to do the right thing in spite of even what your family may be doing. Yeah, I mean, those are just some of the high level comments. I'm trying to think of some other things that
that's good. You can come back. You can come back. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Next up is Phil. Phil, what do you think about those two questions?
Yeah, so the first one, as far as the reception of the Greeks, the regional reception, I mean, we kind of know, right? Because it won that prize for that year. So we know it was favorably received. And since it was favorably received, we can assume that people agreed with the kind of the major import of the play, that the king, the Creon, was at fault, and that it was tragic what happened to the main hero, to Antigone, and really to everyone else involved. So it was well received. It was well, I would say it was not outside of the canon of Greek thought at all. I think it followed that very closely, because again, the ideas of hubris, being punished by the gods, the ideas of overstepping are very much a Greek, you know, within Greek tradition. In fact, there are some allusions that are made in the play to similar plots, right? We have Niobe. Niobe had 7 beautiful daughters and 7 beautiful sons. She started boasting about them. Artemis and Apollo destroy them, and Niobe is turned to stone. And as Antigone is bewailing her plight, she is reminiscing together with a chorus about the story of Niobe, because she was turned to stone, and now she herself is entombed in stone and likely to be turned into stone shortly. So we know that there are similar threads in Greek thought. As far as what touched me personally, I would say it's the humanity of a person and the plight of the person who stands against the state. I like that Sophocles does not have a happy ending. I like it because it's honest, and I also like the fact that Antigone, after she receives the punishment, she is the reality for her starts to sink in, and she almost wavers. And as she recounts it to herself, and she says, "I will never get married. I will never experience the joy of being a wife or a mother. I will never, this is my wedding chamber, this tomb." I mean, I agree with Joe that it's very sad, but the way it's presented is, a lot of times when people go out to protest something, they don't actually think ahead, and they don't realize the price. They may think they realize it, but to really recount it and relive it, I mean, it's something that she is. So, I mean, and this is to Sophocles' artfulness in displaying that. He really paints it very vividly, the suffering that she goes through as she's living out her last days and minutes.
Thank you, Phil. Next up is going to be Dave, Chris, and Ginny. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, Shrikant, your question about what this would mean to the Greeks. It appears to me this is a great historical tradition that we go to entertainment with our own prejudices and we'd like to change the world and we're upset about this, that, and the other. To see someone enact that, I think it's well known what the Shakespearean plays, the characters are very thinly disguised rulers of the present day. And in our society, we always root for the little guy. So that's how I see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Next up is Chris, followed by Ginny. Chris.
Yeah, so to answer the question, I guess, they probably receive a fairly different reception, whether the plays perform in Athens versus Sparta, right? Just because they have a very different garment. And I would say it will probably be received much more enthusiastically in Athens because they have a more of a democratic leaning.
Was it performed in Sparta?
No, I'm just saying, when we say Greek, right?
No, okay. So sorry, in Athens, because that's when.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, I thought you were asking how would I be received by the Greek as we understand Greek, right? So it just depends on, yes, in the city, I think it's enthusiastically received, and they probably link up to the session you did last time in the burst of tragedy, because at the time, because the social class is so stratified, having a play, whether it's this kind of tragedy, where subtly does poke holes at the ruler and the ruling class at the time, is probably one of the only way of releasing tension in society. So I think that's always going to be really well received, because they're almost by custom, the playwrights and the actors are how do I say, immune to backlashes and punishments, right? After the play, after they potentially, backhandedly made fun of whoever's in charge at the time. But I mean, I would say that, my, take for the population at the time really is, go back to this fatalism, which is saying that, hey, things are going to happen, and sometimes it's unfavorable to you. But the best way to go through life is follow the customs and the rights that's been developed throughout the ages, and respect the rule of the gods. And so even if the ending result that you cannot control, at least you'll follow the customs, and then you'll be in better stead, right? So that's kind of where I think the modern interpretation I have is more you should respect, I think, long developed heuristics and traditions, and not just throw it away for any kind of new things that people came up with, and saying this is the best solution. And second of all, I go back to what I said at the beginning. I think making mistakes is important, to really focusing on avoiding making any mistakes is really hard to grow, right? So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Next up is going to be Ginny, followed by Connie. And then, wait a minute, Ginny. Ginny, followed by Barbara. Ginny, go ahead.
So I don't remember who was the ruler at the time of Sophocles' play Antigone.
I don't know.
Oh, we don't know that. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm just thinking if it was one emperor, and how did the Greeks feel about that emperor and all that, but we don't know.
Pericles was the king at that time.
Yes,
Pericles.
that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
And was he considered a wise king ruler at the time? Oh, okay.
It was. In fact, I think Sophocles actually served with him or at his command. So Sophocles actually himself, not just a playwright, but he was a politician, a state.
He's a general, right?
Yeah,
he had to conduct one of the main invasions. Yeah,
Really?
but
Sophocles
there's
was a general. Oh my.
yeah, he was a, but there's another general who had more power that Sakura really butt heads with. But so people always guess that particular could be the person that he obliquely insulted in this. But anyway, so
Thank you. Next up
Thank
is
you.
going to be Barbara, followed by Connie. Barbara.
Yeah, well, this play always does confuse me because it's so clearly against the powers that be. And as you're pointing out, Jenny points out, Philip points out that Sophocles himself was a general and they were at war at this point. And that they were still, that Athens was still fairly confident in its own hegemony. So why would they want to? And I think that maybe Creon is taking, the portrayal of Creon, you could say maybe it's taking a shot at some particular person. But it seems to me that the whole play is pretty heavy on something else, something like duty to yourself or to your family. And that Antigone herself didn't have a whole lot of choices. She had a role to play. She was who she was. She had to do this. She had to bury her brother. She had to follow her father and take care of him before. And I think that this, so if people saw this play, they also knew that other backstory where she wandered away from Thebes with her father after he blinded himself. So, but it just makes me wonder, what was the emphasis here? I always like to read politics into things, but it just doesn't seem to make sense here. It seems like there must be a more, and not a more psychological reading, but maybe a reading more about duty or about family. But I don't really know, and I wonder if anybody does.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. We'll go to Connie next, and then I have a comment. Go ahead, Connie.
Yeah, I'll go to the second part, which is what did I think of the meeting? Someone said this, it might have been Jenny. I was thrilled when I saw this series open, Philip, thank you. And I, again, saw this yesterday. I loved it. I couldn't wait for this discussion today. I went back and forth during the whole thing, starting out thinking, oh, this is the hero, and then wait a minute, and it got my mind really just going deep. I do want to mention what hasn't come up here, if I could real quickly, the
Please.
sister. The sister, the more I'm listening today, I kind of admire her more. She didn't let, and Ebony kind of struck on it. I just really resonated. She didn't, and I did notice it, that she didn't let her sister, bully her. She just, when she tried to make her feel bad that she wouldn't also. But when they came back, when they said, we saw who buried him, the sister then came and said, I did it. And as if, I thought she was a loving, I think she was the purest person in this. There might be more to her than I would like to hear a discussion on her. But anyway, this was absolutely fabulous. Thank you, Phil and Shrikant, so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Connie. So Phil, I'm going to make my comments and would love your comments on that, because part of it is guessing.
Sure.
So I think the most important thing is for me to kind of try to commune with that time using this play as a medium, because it's actually very difficult to commune with another time. And this particular time is actually a amazing time in the history of the world of what is going on at that time. So if you have some connection with that, get some connection, and art is the only little things we have, art and writing of that time is what we have. So what I want to do is that I want to look at the philosophy which is underlying the play. I want to look at its metaphysics, what is the worldview that these people have, and which is there. And I'm saying that Sophocles was a man of his time. He was not presenting anything that was even remotely controversial. Actually, he was presenting the view of the Greek times, at of the people at that time. So it's a very good way of looking at that time. So what is their view on metaphysics? What kind of world? What is the nature of the world? What is their view of epistemology? Now that's a tricky thing because it shows only through how the play is done. What is their view of morality? That's the fourth, ethics. Fifth, what is their view of politics? And sixth, what is their view of aesthetics? And actually, on all these 5 things, they're very, very different from us. And, many of the comments kind of assume all of these things of our times and try to interpret their time, that play through that. And I think it is well worthwhile to actually explore what these things were. So for example, let's start with metaphysics, right? Metaphysics, they held that gods kind of shaped the world, and you as a human being should follow whatever it is that the gods, you think that the gods decree. So you have to understand what gods want, and that is actually shaping everything. So that's the metaphysics. The epistemology for me is just that. Let's take that a little bit later on. Next one, let me take morality. Okay, the thing I actually love about this play is that the Greeks they have a very strong sense of morality, of what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing. So like most of the comments, it's, for example, this is not entertainment for them. This is actually very deep religious experience for them of what is the right thing and what is the value of figuring out, doing your best to figure out what the gods want and to do it. So that, it's deeply moral, and you can see that in the character of Antigone. That's why she's a heroine to the Greeks, that she is following what should be done. She's focused on what should be done. She's willing to pay the price for it. Okay, so that morality is the second thing. Let me just jump to politics. Politics actually follows from the morality here in this case, because the only thing that really matters at this play level is the fact that Creon is doing something which is against metaphysics. It is doing against the will of gods, against what should be. So it is immoral thing that he's doing. And as a result of it, it's going to cause destruction to him and everybody else. Antigone is standing up against it. The most important thing, so I want to go to aesthetics next, and then the most complex thing is the epistemology. Aesthetics, you have to remember that this is not entertainment. Okay, this is not trying to do digs at somebody. This is very serious business. I don't know where I heard this, but somebody did a play and there are consequences. It's not like playwright can do something and get away with it. No. His entire reputation and sometimes his entire life depends on what he does with his play. I remember there was a play done in some city in Greece where this playwright did a play about the defeat of that city. And 4 days after the city, everybody was miserable and the playwright was banished from the city forever. So it's not that, you can do this night things. That's modern times. Okay, it's not, that time is not this time that we're talking about. Secondly, it is very, very serious business. The art is used to pursue morality. It is to emphasize the metaphysics. Now, the most interesting point for me is epistemology, and it's the hardest point to make. The thing I see here is the clarity. I see that in Greek sculpture. Even the Greek landscape has that. It's like you go to Greece, it's basically blue sky, and the color of the land is kind of beige. All the all the vegetation is like sage. So it's you see it as being clarity, it's like visual clarity is what you see. You see the same thing with Greek art, and you see the same thing here. Everything is very stark. You can kind of see the issues. There is no floweriness, no obfuscation. Everything is crystal clear. So that's kind of the style. So those are the things that I see in this play. And that's how they would have looked at the play using these ideas. So that's my best understanding of Greeks at that time. But Phil, I would love your comments on this.
Sure. I'll try to follow that up. Right. So as far as some of the Greek psyche from a kind of metaphysical standpoint, obviously, like you said, the idea that the gods are underpinning everything that's happening, and this idea of fate is very strong. But what is fate? That's where it gets a little bit tricky. In Oedipus, we kind of learned that character is fate, right? The way you are really is why you follow a particular course. Character is fate, not a set of like a sort of Calvinistic predestination to be something or do something. And that is so true when you think about it. We all have our kind of our sort of knee-jerk reactions, right? Certain buttons that get pushed and we react. I know this about myself. I'm sure you know this about yourselves too. So we tend to follow into these courses of actions. When we look back and we say, again, I did this exact thing again. And Creon, I think, follows in that. And of course, Sophocles uses characters like that who are hyperbolized to make a point. So Creon is an epitome of that. He has all the kind of the birthmarks of a tyrant, of a ruler, of an unreasonable, unyielding person, to make a simple point that people like that, their rule is actually very fragile, and that they are on a razor's edge when they think they are actually doing a state of favor and solidifying it. They're actually teetering on the brink of disaster and collapse. And so that's metaphysics. Ethics, well, we've touched on that. So the idea is you have this conflict between the state, power, and edict, and something that is morally right. And I think that thread is so strong in humanity. And I don't think it's was necessarily stronger back then than it is today. I think we're the same way today. People burn things down because they believe something to be wrong. People protest and rise up, and people, I mean, it's a thing. We're hardwired. There's something in our organization that demands some sort of standard that we all agree on. And when that standard is violated, it unleashes Dionysian chaos. And so this leads me back to this question: who is that represents the Dionysian, and who represents the Apollonian in this play? Because typically Apollo is the ruler, and he represents rule of law and so on. So if that's the case, then Antigone, as unlikely as she is the Apollonian character here, and who the person that's unleashing the Dionysian chaos is actually Creon, because he explodes the order, and he explodes and unleashes the chaos of Dionysus, right? That represents the sort of these chaotic and catastrophic events. Epistemology, that's a tricky one. Obviously, we've seen in Oedipus how knowledge can be not just an asset, but a liability, and knowledge can lead to terrible disasters. And here it's what is the epistemology? I guess Tiresias is the person that's delivering this epistemology to the king, and in this case he fails to act on it right away, and he thinks that he knows. Here's the thing where I think the hubris kind of comes back to this point. Creon assumes he can read people's motivations, a few times he says, you did this for profit. You do this for profit, you do this for that. So he's assuming he knows what's going on in people's hearts. He thinks he knows what's going on in Antigone's heart, that she is just insolent and is challenging him. But in fact, we have limitations of our knowledge. The epistemology here is that we do not know everything, and therefore we have to be open to learn and to adapt and change course when required. And so that's the epistemology, is that the world is too big for us to know everything. But at the same time, we do know things that we do know. Absolutely, we should probably stick for them. And so I liked how Evanique, I think, brought up the point that both Creon and Antigone, they're both kind of arrogant and both a little bit stubborn, but her stubbornness and arrogance is rewarded, or at least is seen as a positive, whereas his is seen as a negative. Why is that? Because she's stubborn about actual reality. I guess that also happens to matter. What are you stubborn about? If you're stubborn about, things that actually are true, I guess that's okay. But if you're stubborn about things that are not true in reality, for the way we see it, then your stubbornness is not going to lead to anything good.
Thank you, Phil. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Allison. Joe.
There's a lot of questions there, so I think when it comes to the ethics aspect of things, I think that it's kind of a way of knowing, and this idea of how you're going to essentially obtain wisdom, and that's a difficult question, because I think that wisdom is very much attained through experience, and so at that, I think almost in a way that Antigone going through what she went through, well, I mean, I don't want to say it had to be done, but I think that she had a set of principles. She stuck to those principles, what she believed to be just, and and I think that it ended obviously badly, but in a way, I guess you have to ask yourself if it was worth the price. I mean, some people would actually say it was, in the sense that your principles mean more in your character. And if we're going back to Greek times where character was actually of the utmost importance, then yes, you did what you thought to be right, and you're actually, you paid the price, but you actually lived what would be considered, I would guess, a good life. As far as actually, it's interesting what Phil just brought up with Tiresias, and basically Creon's ignoring Tiresias's advice. I think that aspect of it kind of, there is a kind of a hubris that actually goes on that I didn't mention a little bit earlier, that I didn't consider, I should say, not necessarily mention. But actually, those are my comments for now. I'm still thinking these through.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Allison, Ginny, and Barbara. Allison.
I think it makes complete sense that this was written in Athens and not Sparta, because Sophocles may have been a general, but still Athens was a city of intellectuals. It was, the city of democracy, the city of thinking, it wasn't Sparta. And I think that even, I feel like as you read through this, you're rooting for Antigone. I mean, and at the end, it's Creon who suffers the most, really. And so I think, it's not a surprise to me that this play was so popular in Athens, because I think, in some ways, Antigone sort of represents Athens and Creon represents Sparta. It's, I think it just kind of makes sense in that way, that, You know, I mean, it seems like in some ways it seems like these ideas fit with today, but really that really fits with what they were going through. That they were trying to have this very open intellectual thinking society, but then they had this enemy that was just all about brute force. That's kind of, you know, dragging them into wars they didn't really necessarily want to be in. So it's, you know, it's interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Alison. Next up is Jeannie, followed by Barbara. Jeannie.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Philip, for what you just said, and Shrikant. I mean, it's a wonderful I'm learning from you guys and what you have to say about everything. But what I was thinking is that why do we lean toward Antigone? So ideal and what she does in the play as opposed to Creon. I mean, I think it's natural for human to feel more loyal to their family members than the law and the rulers of your country or your state. So naturally, we root for Antigone and what Antigone stands for and what she does. And not with Creon.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. Next up is Barbara. Barbara, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Jenny. I think she's right. I see Creon and Antigone as kind of similar. She did what she had to do, I feel. And Creon was warned not to do what he wanted to do. But that was sort of a utilitarian, you know, if you do this, the consequences will be thus. Now, he's not supposed to care about that. He has to do what he has to do. So they're both actually acting out of the same principle of some sort of integrity or duty. But we're more sympathetic to her because her duty seems higher or her motivation seems purer, more pure than his does. But it's funny because we have a tendency to see them as I guess as Americans have a tendency to see them as totally opposite. But I wonder if the Greeks saw them as sort of not two sides of the same coin, but maybe something like that, where they were more similar than different. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Barbara. I think Greeks thought that they were even more opposite than Americans do. They're just completely different. Phil, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to bring up, this comparison. I think, for us living several thousand years later, it's hard to imagine this idea of burial being such a big deal. But I think at the time it was pretty straightforward. I can't think of a good analogy right off the top of my head, but it must have been something so understood and so ingrained that you do not leave a person unburied. Without that understanding, I agree, Barbara. This becomes kind of a toss of a die, because then they're acting the same way. But with that extra information that we know as an audience watching this, we know instinctively who is right. I think that is crucial. And I want to mention very quickly Homer's Iliad. If you remember this big deal about burying and giving Hector's body back to his father, it takes like a huge part of that epic. Why? Because it was such a big deal, and Achilles' initial refusal to give back Hector's body to his father after he already killed him was such an affront. It was beyond what was reasonable. And that's why he repents and he realizes that it's inhumane, even though Hector killed his dear friend and lover, possibly, even though he's an enemy, there's still certain bonds between human beings that you do not transgress. And this is why this play is so beautiful, because it really sets the stage for this question of, well, we give a state so many powers and for a good reason, but there are certain things that the state should never, ever transgress. And that's why this place resonates with us, because, and that's why it won, most likely, that's probably why it won that recognition in the first year that it it was produced and played in the theater in Athens, because it resonated so deeply with everyone that there are certain limits. You shall go here, but no further. And of course, these limits should be enforced. And we need Antigones to keep enforcing them. But once they rise, their stubbornness and their fierceness and savageness is supported typically by the larger populace. Otherwise, what's the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter? Well, probably the difference would be that a freedom fighter is fighting for something that is supported by the majority of other people versus, an outlier.
Thank you. Ernest, did you have a point?
I totally agree with Philip. But Barbara asked a very good question. What's the point of that play for the Greek audience? It wanted to position difference between tyranny and democracy. That's his idea what tyranny can do to the nation. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernest. Really appreciate that. So I just want to make one quick comment. It's actually not just like Greek culture is not like this monolithic. Like if you look at the difference between Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, you see this, this philosophy, even the metaphysics change over time. Aeschylus is far more God-centric, would never have a character like Antigone, and Euripides is much more kind of less God than Sophocles. So Sophocles is kind of in the middle of these three. So it is really fascinating to look at how these cultures are and how they change. And this is really a unique opportunity of just trying to get into this, because it allows you to see, not only common themes that we have, but also our differences. We are not really conscious of many things that we do. We just take it for granted. And this gives us an opportunity of saying, wait a minute, I operate this way and everybody around me operates this way, taking this for granted. But is it really right to take it for granted? So it allows you to think. It allows you to, as Owen Barfield puts it, it allows you to have that felt experience, felt change of consciousness of saying, oh, I can think about it in this way. I'd never thought of that possible. And and for that, you kind of have to step away from all your preconception and try to commune with the work itself. And that's what we've been doing in, Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and Gospel of John. And that's exactly what you need to do with great work of art. So I want to tell you about two things. So I want to tell you about what plays are coming up, but I think we're getting so much out of language and diving deep into works of great literary quality, of great poetic quality, that I want to expand. That. So the next thing we're doing is I have just announced meetups on Khalil Gibran, his book, The Prophet. It is actually a very deep work. It is one of the most, I think, in the top 5 most read poetry of all times. The other 2 being, I think, Bible and Shakespeare. So he's in good company. Okay, lots of people have read it. And it is very deep. And it is really kind of, it's like a secular version, or it is kind of non-denomination version of some of the very deep ideas that have been around for a long time. And it is presented in a very beautiful, very accessible way. So we're doing this meetup on Wednesday, and we're going to do a follow-up on Friday. I want to see how people relate to this work and what they get from it. So I, cordially invite you, all of you, to do it. It takes only, you can listen to it in the meetup page. I put a link to audio, YouTube audio of it. takes only 1 hour, 45 minutes to listen to the whole thing. And you can probably read it faster than that. So it is real, and the topics covered in that short work are quite stunning. So I hope you would join us for that. Let me tell you about this, the rest of the plays in this series. We got 6 more plays. So today was Antigone by Sophocles. April 2nd, the next one, 2 weeks. It's going to be 2 weeks apart. So I just want to give you a heads up so you can start reading it. Any great things, it's worth reading it multiple times. You can also, with YouTube, you actually can find performances of it. So choose one that you like. Many of these works are not in English, so you will have to find. 2 of them are in English, but the rest of them are not. So you will do play around with the translations to find one that you like. If Phil, if you have some recommendations of the translation, you can just go ahead and put it on the meetup page for people. The next one needs no translation.
Right, I was going to say.
Yes, exactly. The next one is
No
going to be
translation.
Othello. Please do not use a translation for it. Just read it in original. I have to tell you a short story about it a little bit later on because it's well worth it. Short anecdote about that. The next one is going to be, oh, wait a minute. I've got the dates wrong here. I'll fix the dates. It's going to be every 2 weeks, right? Phil, it's going to be every 2 weeks, right? Okay. So the dates on the meetup page are wrong. I'll fix it. The meetup dates in the meetup app are right, but in the text, I have made a mistake. I'll fix that. So it's going to be Othello by Shakespeare, followed by Le Cid by Corneille. After that is going to be Don Carlos by Schiller. It's an amazing play. After that, Enemy of the People by Ibsen. Saint Joan by George Bernard Shaw. And then Cyrano de Bergerac by Rostand. So it's it's just amazing set of plays. Okay. So I want, anybody wants to give a feedback about this series, please go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Phil would love to hear what you think of the series. We have done in the past, we have done large works like Dostoevsky and Dante and Faust. We are now going into these plays. And you saw today how much you can get from trying to kind of deal with Greeks. And I think the same thing will happen for each of these people. So, Joe, what do you think about this series?
I'm excited about this series. I enjoyed the plays; they're entertaining, and to be able to come here and discuss the deeper meanings behind that is it's a treat. So thank you, Phil, for leading this, and thank you, Shrikant, for the forum. Excellent.
Ginny, what do you think?
Again, I'm just so amazed what scholars you guys are, Philip, Shrikant. I thought of all the years since my college years, which was 17 years ago, nobody ever talked about discussion of Antigone, for example. And goodness gracious. Were you drama majors? Were you, theater majors? I just thought that only theater majors read plays by Greek playwrights and all of that. So I thank you again. And
we're well-meaning amateurs.
What's that? I didn't hear what you just said.
I said we're well-meaning amateurs.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm very impressed by all of you. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ginny. The thing is that actually these are living things, and these are actually foundations of our culture. And the fact that we are, all of us don't read it, to that extent, we are a little bit dead to what is in us, what is actually living in us. We are a little bit dead to that. And this is an opportunity of letting it come alive, but it's not just about the plays. It is really about you, because these issues are perennial issues that all of us face.
Absolutely. These issues are universal, but for you guys to actually focus on this particular projects, I mean, plays, and then to have a discussion, that is just very unusual, I think. Well, or maybe you guys have been doing it in New York all these years, and I was not in New York to participate. Who knows? But maybe that's the advantage of COVID, and what do you call it? The Zooming world that we're living in. That we can all come together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. What I would say is that this is what we've been doing in 52 Living Ideas. Whether these plays is only the latest one. We went through Dante, we went to Goethe, we went to Dostoevsky, we went through Tao Te Ching, we went through Bhagavad Gita, we went through the Gospel of John, and we are now going through Prophet. So these are all classics, and these raise ideas which are core to our being. And what happens is that most modern people get caught up in the news cycle, you see, and then you're just reacting to what is around. And when you actually look back, you actually haven't gotten anything. You think your mind is doing something, but it's not. What this does is that this really allows you to consider things at a very deep level. And actually it is transformative, like most people who are here think that it is, that they have made big difference in their lives. So I'm just delighted that you're here. Let's look at what Maritza has to say. Maritza.
For me, I'm delighted by that it's a play, and it's not actually a light work, but compared to some of the other texts that we're doing deep dive into, it may seem a little bit light. But it's also fascinating to hear all the different perspectives, and for me, it's most like maybe exciting to hear different people tease out a concept that I may have seen a little bit when I read it, but like either didn't really spend time thinking about that one thought, or I didn't quite see it that way. It's really like exciting to listen as different people kind of take that little piece and stretch it out and look at it from many angles, and then you start to see it in a different way, and it gives a greater appreciation for what you read, because you're like, oh, I didn't even see that. And I always feel like if I leave a discussion like this and I'm like, well, now I have to reread the play because I'm going to see it differently, that's like very exciting, and I feel like that's like super helpful. So thank you guys for that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. See, what happens is that it is difficult to commune with work at another time. And many of us trying to do the same thing with all the different backgrounds that we have, all the different strengths, all the different weaknesses that we have. It's like multiple searchlights, and it gets illuminated better than what you could do yourself. Even if you tried your very best and did it many, many, many times, what you get from this multiple perspective is much, much higher. Next up is Allison.
One thing I noticed with the list was that quite a few of them I read when I was in high school. And I know that like there's always a debate about whether or not it's a good idea or not to introduce these classics to high school kids, because you always feel like they're a little too young to really get the full benefit from it. But on the other hand, if you don't do it then, they may never pick them up ever. So I think it's really interesting to read this, having read it when I was younger, and what did I think about it then? And then to go back and reread these now. And I feel like I've had, so many different experiences that, I can get so much more out of it now. But it's kind of interesting though, that even though I feel that way, some of my interpretations when I was younger were not really wrong either. It's just that I have a lot more depth now than I had back then, a lot more life experience to bring to it.
Okay, that gives me. Give me just a second, Ginny. You had. Give me just a second, Ginny. Go ahead and type the exclamation mark. Hold on, I just want to make sure everybody gets to comment. relating to that, I forgot to tell that little anecdote, which is actually very apropos here. My friend Rupali, during COVID, was doing classes on Zoom for kids in India. And these kids, when they started out, didn't know English much, okay? But she has this amazing teacher who's a good friend of mine, Dave, and he's the drama teacher. And he said, okay, let's do Shakespeare. Okay, now these people don't know English, okay? They're struggling with English. And he started out by doing the easy version of Shakespeare. There is some kind of dumbed down version because they could get into it. And then he showed them the original version of that. After that, the kids refused to touch this, the dumbed down version. These were kids about in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, okay, who did not know English. All right. So they picked up English in order to read Shakespeare. And then they started performing plays. So they would do it on Zoom. So different characters would be in their different homes. And they would actually do parts of the plays, Shakespeare plays. And that was within a space of 6 months. And of course, their English went through the roof. If they were at 30%, they were suddenly at like 90% percentile of all the kids around them, because everybody had said, oh, you are not very good at languages and stuff like that. But with that, because it's not just language, it's giving you so much. These plays are actually giving you all the richness of human life and human consciousness and human emotions and human thoughts and wide variety of actions and social issues that they face in a way which means so much to you that you are prepared to do the work, and you never saw the reason to do that work. So it just elevates you. And that's what it can do for 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade kids who don't know English. Now imagine what it can do for you or for me. We are starting at a much better place, and we should be able to get more out of it than these kids can. So I just wanted to make that point. Next up is Jeannie, followed by Joe. Jeannie.
That's amazing, Shrikant. I mean, the story of go from not speaking English to Shakespeare within 6 months' time. I mean, that's truly amazing. And I just wanted to ask Allison a quick question. What high school did you go to where you read all these plays when you were in high school? I mean, I didn't read them until I was in college. So I'm curious as to what high school you went to.
It was a public high school in Orange County, California. But yeah,
No kidding.
Yeah, I didn't even realize how good my school was until I left. And then I realized that so many schools don't do that.
No, certainly mine
very
did.
lucky. I really was.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that's interesting about these plays is that we can start to see the how they are still important today, but also how they relate to works of literature over time. And I think that we can make connections that, just thinking about it today, again, thinking about civil disobedience or with Thoreau, or even thinking about it in terms of like Hamlet, and thinking about those types of terms. I think that that's extremely interesting and fun.
Wonderful. All right. So we are about to wrap up. I just want to get a sense of if any, which of you are really interested in The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. Just go ahead and say yes or no or maybe, because I want to go into it as an example of what work can do, because actually this is in relationship to not just the literature series. It is definitely in the main course of that, but also what we have been doing with Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and Gospel of John, because he deals with many of the concepts there very, very well. So I'm glad to see so many people interested. So it's going to be at 9 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. So, and then we are going to do a follow-up on Friday. And if it works, I don't know. I mean, Maritza, do you want to talk a little bit about it? Because Maritza has been leading the poetry meetups, and we've done Khalil Gibran in poetry, and he's been, it's been amazing. So basically, I will do. I'm actually very excited about language. And I'm looking at all of these things in terms of language and poetry and its effectiveness in, in just how we think. So it is very deep. And I find that poets have really, they are like the cutting edge. Artists are the cutting edge in figuring out what is going on with our consciousness. So, so I'm very excited about it. Maritza, you want to make any comments about your thoughts about doing Gibran?
I think it's a multi-layered aspect. So first of all, the work itself is brilliant and almost transcendent of the era. But if you don't transcend the era and you look at the work itself, for the time, for his history, it's even more impressive. And so I think that it's a fantastic thing to look at, and it's interesting because it fills so many different buckets of writing when we look at it. Like, you have prose, you have poetry, there's the metaphor, and it's so very deep and rich. I think that it's going to be like, if this was a delight to look at a play, I think because a poem can have so many different nuances, it's going to be great to get everyone's different perspectives on how they read it and really how they felt it, which is what I'm interested in hearing and seeing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to see how different people react to it. So I still don't know the exact format, but it's going to be heavily conversational. So each person can really try to commune. And what I urge you to do is to just commune with things and just focus on things that speak to you. Don't try to make like generalized commentary or anything like that. Just look for things which what Owen Barfield calls felt transformations of consciousness. They'll say, okay, that I find really beautiful. That was something that really blew me away. Just focus on those aspects. Forget about the rest, because all the growth really comes from such sparks. So just focus on the things that really cause that spark in your brain. And I think we'll have something really fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. See you folks soon. Bye.